Well, good evening, comrades, and welcome to the latest in our fortnightly series of discussion meetings hosted by Talking About Socialism. I'm Ed Potts. I'm going to chair tonight's meeting, which is on the subject of communist unity. What sort of organisation do we want and how do we get it? We're going to have an introduction to the discussion from Nick Wrack, who will be familiar, I think, to all, and then a discussion from the floor, and we'll close the meeting at 9 o'clock tonight. A few bits of housekeeping just before we get started. If this is your first meeting, then welcome. We are proud of offering a forum for comradely and respectful debate, in which everybody gets the opportunity to put forward their point of view, ask questions, and make their own contributions. The way that we do that is having an introduction to the discussion for perhaps 20 minutes or however long Nick thinks he'll need, and then we will have contributions from the floor, which we generally aim to limit to 3 minutes. So if I cut you off, please don't feel aggrieved. It's just to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to come in and be heard. The meeting is being recorded. If you're watching this meeting after the fact, it's usually uploaded to YouTube and Facebook. So hello to anybody who's watching after the meeting on those forums. And you can also, of course, share the video with other people you think might be interested who couldn't attend tonight. In terms of chairing and coming into the discussion, it's really helpful to me if you are able to use the virtual hands on Zoom to indicate that you want to come in and speak. If you can't do that for any reason, simply raise your actual hand, and I'll keep an eye on people's cameras to make sure that we don't miss anybody out. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Nick to introduce tonight's discussion.
Thank you very much, Ed. Thanks, comrades. Welcome. Thanks for coming. So Ed said 20 minutes or however long I think I need. So I've just said to Ed before we started the meeting that I could take 2 hours and I still wouldn't say everything that I want. I'm going to take 15 minutes, I hope. Ed can stop me after 15 minutes, but I won't have touched on many of the points that I think do need to be discussed. And I want to start off with some preliminary remarks just to frame this discussion. It's important, and I hope people have seen in the material that we've carried on our website, it's important to note that we, in talking about socialism, have put a great deal of emphasis on the idea of communist unity and the idea that those on the Marxist left, revolutionary socialists or communists, ought to be in the same organization. We are a small group talking about socialism from a Marxist point of view, but we want to play a role in trying to get the communist unity that we think is necessary. And some people listening, and maybe in this meeting now, may think that we go on a bit too much about the need and the importance of communist unity, and perhaps not enough about some of the issues that are coming up. And there's some truth in that. We do need to spend time to develop the discussion on where there have been or there are differences of opinion, of theory, of ideology, whatever you might want to call it. But as I've put in my last 2 articles, which are on the website, and I hope people have read, one's called Dealing with Differences, and then the last one, Why Communist Unity. I've dealt quite a lot with the importance of communist unity as a project. And it's because we face globally, as everybody here will appreciate, an absolutely devastating tsunami of attacks on the working class and oppressed people internationally. And I don't have the time to go into them. You all know them: economically, inequality, climate change, threat of nuclear war, and so on. And at the same time, we see that capitalism has developed the means of production, so the productive forces in society, to a huge degree. The capitalist economy is drawn in every single part of the globe. World economy is fully integrated, almost fully integrated. And a byproduct of that, an important byproduct of that, is the fact that we have an absolutely enormous international working class. We have a working class that's got the size, the power, the point in production to change things, if only it were conscious of its own power and ability to change things. And to do that, it's a question of making the working class conscious, or helping the working class to become conscious both of the rotten ripeness of capitalism for change, and the fact that the working class itself is the agent for change. So that's a sort of background that I think is important for us to understand. If the working class were conscious, in my opinion, we could change the world. I'll say almost overnight. I don't want, that's an exaggeration. It's a bit of hyperbole, but you understand what I mean. What is it? 7 billion people on the planet, overwhelmingly the working class, a tiny proportion of owners of capital, and yet they get away with the continued exploitation. So that's the first thing: is how do we help the international working class to understand its capacity and its for change and its historic task to carry out that change. Now, we've made the point repeatedly that what we need is a party that makes that point, and that isn't afraid to make that point, that doesn't seek to make meager demands on the existing capitalist class, but unashamedly calls for a communist transformation. Our voice, the voice of talking about socialism, is very small. The voice of any of the larger organizations in and of themselves is also relatively small, although obviously much bigger than we are. What we lack is a mass party, not just in this country, but across the globe, a mass party in every single country that collaborates, that works together, that shares ideas, that tries to coordinate activity in order to try to bring about the revolutionary transformation of the globe that we are trying to achieve. And so the question of communist unity against that background of what is possible but what's missing is an absolutely key ingredient. And therefore, we in TAS have raised on a number of occasions, well, right from our very beginning, actually, we've set the idea of communist unity as our keystone. And when the opportunity arose to discuss with the comrades from the Communist Party of Great Britain and from Prometheus in December, the proposal at that stage was for a joint educational. We raised the idea of why should we limit it to educational activities? Why don't we see if there's the possibility of creating a fused communist organization? And that's what we proposed, and we were very pleased that that was taken up. And we then put forward documents. You can see them on our website, where we proposed an agenda for the discussions. We proposed the name. We proposed discussing where we agreed in the first instance, and the discussions have gone, for the most part, reasonably well. I'll say this, that the meetings themselves, although they all but one have the problems of being on Zoom and the impediments that creates, they've all been comradely, they've all been enjoyable. I think we've exchanged ideas in a good way, and there seems to be enthusiasm in the meetings for what we're doing. Recently, those that have been following this process will have seen that differences have arisen. And one of the things that I'm going to throw up for discussion is the importance of discussing out these differences and doing so in a way that seeks to overcome and resolve the differences. I just want to make a sort of passing by comment about talking about socialism. We're a very small organization, but we've got members in TAS who come from all sorts of different Marxist backgrounds. Some are long in the tooth, some are newer, some have been in one organization, some have been in another, some have been in yet another, and again, and so on. So we all have different backgrounds, we all have differences of opinion, and no doubt we all have quite significant differences on some issues. We are not afraid of discussing differences, and we're not afraid of having differences. And I can say honestly that those people that I collaborate with, even where I disagree with them, and some of them I might disagree with quite profoundly on one or two issues, we discuss and engage on the basis that we are all committed to the revolutionary transformation of society. And so, therefore, any differences that we have are differences between people who have a shared objective, a shared goal, a shared agenda, if you like, a shared politics, even if within that overarching political objective, there are differences. And we've looked at the question of communist unity in the same way. If we look around, I used to be in the militant tendency, what is now the Socialist Party. Other people can speak for themselves what organizations they were in. And I can say that when I was in that organization, there was a lot of hostility between, say, the Socialist Party, or the militant as it was, and the SWP. And no doubt that probably still carries on today. In my opinion now, that's an impediment to achieving what we want. I don't agree with a lot of what the SWP says or the way that it goes about stuff, and nor do I agree with a lot of what the Socialist Party does. But inside those organizations and the political positions of those organizations as communist or revolutionary socialist organizations, we have a shared objective. And in my opinion, stand to be corrected, the differences that exist between those organizations should not mean that the members of those organizations are in separate parties or groups. It duplicates work. It's unnecessary. It sets communists against one another. It weakens us. Inside the working class, there is a very positive instinct for unity. Sometimes that can go too far. You want unity with everybody, and sometimes that's not possible. But I think also on the Marxist left, there is, behind the sort of partisan approach that one might have for their own party, perhaps a question: would we not be able to do our job better and get there more quickly if we actually all collaborated? If we were all in the same organization and we discussed the differences in a comradely way between communists who all want to overthrow capitalism. I think that this idea of communist unity is a seed that can and will grow. And so, from that point of view, I'm saying that we are committed to the forging communist unity process and we want it to succeed. However, it is important not to hide or gloss over issues that arise in the course of these discussions. It's clear from the articles that I or that we sent out asking if people would read. I don't know if everybody's had an opportunity to read them, but the ones that I've written, but I also in the bulletin that went out yesterday, we encourage people to read two articles from the comrades in the CPGB. One from Mike McNair called Unity in Three Parts, and one from Jack Conrad, Rediscovering Our Common Language, I think it was called. And it is important that the followers of Forging Communist Unity do read the material and try to engage with it, because they each in their own way throw up really important questions. But before we get to those important questions, I want to say this, that sometimes, well, more often than not actually now, when I leave one of the meetings, I can come out feeling positive that we've had a good engagement, we've engaged and treated one another as a comrade, and so on. And then when I read the reports in the Weekly Worker about the same meeting, I wonder if the comrades have come out of the same meeting. And I think I speak for both Ed and myself that we think that quite often and regularly, the positions that we've advocated in the meetings and in our articles are not reported properly, accurately in the pages of the Weekly Worker or in the Communist Online Forum. And if these discussions are going to work, there has to be a commitment to accurate reporting, not to exaggeration. Of course, direct, blunt criticism and so on is. I'm a pachyderm. I've got thick skin. I can take it. But the people that are watching this want to know whether they can, in fact, would they join an organization that came out of this process? Is the organization that's going to be fused, if we're successful, going to be one that the people participating in the process and the people watching the process want to be in? And I think the question of culture, that's internal culture, and external culture in relating or engaging with other people in different organizations, is a very, very important one. And if we're going to have a commitment to open debate, then the point of view of the opponent has to be reported accurately so that people can see what you're taking issue with and then engage. I'll just make a point in passing, for example. We've linked deliberately to those two articles in the Weekly Worker so that people can see the articles and make up your own mind. And if you think that they're right and that we're wrong, then you say so. And there may be people, members of TAS, who actually think that on quite a lot of issues or some issues, the Communist Party of Britain is correct, and that I'm or me and Ed are wrong. That doesn't concern me. What concerns me is that we have the ability to have a comradely debate and discussion, engaging with what the other group is saying or the other people. So I'm going to raise a couple of issues which I try to illustrate what I mean. And I'm not going to be able to do this any detail. I have committed myself in writing in the last article to writing a further 3 articles to deal with these points in more detail, and I will find the time to do that. I hope everybody appreciates that Ed and I both work. We don't have a lot of time and we're doing what we can, but we want this process to work, and therefore we are engaging in the process seriously, and we're trying to commit as much time as we can as possible. So I'm just going to try to take up a couple of the issues that have come up and see if I can deal with them. Right, so I never get this share. Right, so where are we here? No, I don't want that. I want... So Just just bear with me, please. I will say, this is the article from Mike McNair, and there's quite a lot in there that I do agree with. And one of the points that he makes is that it's important not to allow what he calls a negative dialectic to develop, i.e., people get pushed into different pushed into positions that drive each other further and further away. But okay, so here I'm going to just deal with this. On the question, do we need a minimum program at all? There was a clear disagreement with TAS comrades, but not with those from Prometheus. That's going back to an earlier meeting. We've raised at the last meeting that, certainly in my opinion, I don't understand where that's come from. I have raised a query about the minimum maximum program and whether what we need in its place is actually what I would call a program for the working class in power, a program for the working class government. Because I think that there is a danger, and I'm going to come on to this in a minute, that what the comrades in the CPGB are arguing for, and I stand to be corrected, but this is my surmise, that what they stand for is a period or a sort of steps towards communism, a sort of stages, a version of what used to be called the official Communist Party stages theory. That what you do is the working class comes to power and it implements its democratic demands, it extends democracy. And then there's a period of further development, and at some stage, we then have a transformation to communism. Now, for the reasons that I outlined at the beginning of my talk, the nature of the world economy, the development of the world economy, the size of the working class, I don't think that that is the right approach. I think that the task of the working class in this period is to come to power and abolish capitalism. Not simply to come to power and initiate a period of workers' rule, but a period of workers' rule in which the working class, as the ruling class, abolishes capitalism. Now, I think there is, as Mike McNair recognizes in this article, a fundamental difference, or potentially a fundamental difference. Now, is there any basis or justification for me saying this? And I'm just going to try and find another passage, if I may, from the CB. So here we've got a paragraph here from the CPG's danger. He's talking about the negative dialectic, and he's saying there's a danger that TAS, because I think both me and Ed have been emphasizing the importance of the maximum part of the program. I personally don't like the idea of the minimum maximum, so I'll say that outright. So if the CPGB comrades have got an issue with that's fine, for the reason I set out. That doesn't mean I'm not in favor of a program, by the way. I'm going to come on in a moment to some of the points in Jack Conrad's article, where I think he's misrepresenting the positions that I've, for one, argued. But if we look at this from Mike, from the CPGB side, the danger is to, I don't know what's going on. I can't highlight it. The danger is to underestimate the substantial element of socialization in what we propose in the minimum program. And then he says this: what the CPGB proposes is basically political democracy. I think that's right. My reading of the CPGB program, I think that is what they propose. It's not all that they propose. I don't want to be I don't want to misrepresent them. They have a quite elaborate minimum program, actually, most of which I don't have fundamental or serious disagreements with. But coming to power as the working class and implementing the minimum program, all of which they accept can be achieved or implemented and be compatible with capitalism, in my opinion, is a mistaken approach. The question is, or the question that's posed, how do we get to communism? Well, following Marx, in my opinion, to get to communism, the majority working class has to come to power. It has to seize or take state power. I don't mean that in an insurrectionary coup, but it has to come to power and become the ruling class. And for the first time in history, it will be a majority ruling class. And I'm then going to just go to something else, because this is something that's featured quite heavily.
Do you want to wrap up in a couple of minutes, Nick? Will that give you enough time?
Okay, I'll have to just miss loads, but don't worry. Right, this is a really important just going to. So this is what Marx said in the Critique of the Gotha program, which was the program for the unification of two workers' organizations, one Marxist and one not, what was called the Salian, the Eisenackers and the can't remember the other ones at the moment, just escaped me. Anyway, Marx says this: between capitalist and communist society, there lies the period of the revolutionary transformation of the one into the other. Corresponding to this is also a political transition period in which the state can be nothing but the revolutionary dictatorship of the proletariat. Now, I don't like quoting people very much, but that epitomizes for me what is a Marxist approach to achieving communism, or part of it. And he's using a phrase there which I don't think is apposite in the modern period, the revolutionary dictatorship of the proletariat. In modern use, I would say the revolutionary period of workers' rule or working class rule. But what is he saying is the task of that period? Is it simply to implement the democratic gains of the Paris Commune, which inspired Marx tremendously, or is it to use that period of rule to actually transform society from capitalism into communism? And at the end of that period, what you have is communism. Now, I think there are lots and lots of other points that I would like to make if I had the time, but I don't have the time. There's some confusion about the terminology and the words that the different parties to these discussions use. That is a problem, but it's not insurmountable. But I think that the way that the Communist Party of Great Britain use some of the terminology leads them into what I think is an error in terms of what the task of the working class is. I cannot see a period of working class rule occurring without the working class seeing the necessity, particularly if in the preparatory stage of coming to power, the Communist Party has elaborated and outlined and set out in its program the tasks for the expropriation of the capitalist class. I cannot see how, if the working class is in power, it would tolerate its own continued exploitation by bosses who would continue, to a certain degree at least, if the CPGB's program and articles are to be read at face value, where the boss would continue to rule to some degree in some parts, if not the majority of the economy. I think that the program that we need has to educate the working class as to its decisive task, and that is to come to state power, to extend democracy, to achieve, I'm using shorthand and I'll have to elaborate if people don't understand what I'm saying, to achieve a commune type democracy, but not in and of itself, not for its own sake, in order that it can use the position of the working class now as the majority ruling class in society to abolish itself. How does it abolish itself? How does it get rid of classes? It gets rid of wage labor. It gets rid of the exploitative capitalist commodity production of commodities for the creation of surplus value. And that's what the task of the working class is. It's not to come to power and then sit on one's hands and enjoy the extension of democracy and going to work at 9 o'clock and still being under the thumb of the boss. Ed, I haven't been able to go to Jack's article. I apologize to Jack. I haven't been able to do justice to Mike's article. I apologize to Mike. I hope that the points that I have raised do indicate some of the concerns that I certainly have, but also some of the political issues that are facing us. And I'll say this in finishing this introduction. Because of these differences, we need to take our time. It may be that I've misunderstood. It may be that I'm persuaded that what I've said about the CPG's program is not what they're saying. And that the contradictions that I see in their program don't actually exist. And if I'm wrong, I'll hold my hand up and say, great, I've been persuaded. But we do need time. And it does mean that everybody who's following these discussions needs to read, familiarize themselves with the concepts, and challenge, ask questions, criticize, don't accept anything that anybody's saying, certainly not what I'm saying. And if we have that attitude, criticize everything, engage properly as comrades in the idea of communist unity, then I think we will make progress. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much indeed, Nick, and I'm sure that comrades have had a chance to read some, if not all, of the articles that you've referred to, and there'll be questions and comments and things where people agreed and disagreed on various aspects of it, and of course you can return to it in the discussion as well. So I'm going to ask comrades now. Nick, would you mind stopping your screen sharing, and then we can I can just see all the comrades in the meeting. So I'm going to take contributions from the floor now. Initially 3 minutes, but hopefully we'll have a chance to call people back in to develop points further in due course if they so wish. So to kick us off, I'm going to take Minnie and then Peter. So Minnie, go ahead.
Sorry, did you call me and I didn't hear you? Sorry.
I did, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't
You
hear
want to
you.
come in? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Nick. I've read the articles. I've read your recent article and I've read Peter's recent article. I want to mention I found that particularly useful, reading Peter Kennedy, the different socialism, communism, transition. Thought that was really interesting. Right. Okay. So one thing I want to say, what type of an organization do we want to be in this communist, Freudian communist unity? I saw Lawrence's presentation, and Lawrence and Jack, was it, on the early CPGB of the 1920s, where there were different groups involved. There was the BSP, the SLP, different groups. And I think Lenin criticized them for this as well, but those groups seem to stay in their groups, but under the umbrella of CPGB. And people referring to that as factions, but I don't. I I would be grateful to know what comrades think faction means. I think faction means sort of different ideas, not necessarily, oh, I'm in this group, but different ideas uh, and different points in an argument and different, but not necessarily different groups, different parties within a party. That's not sort of an organization I would be thinking to join as in Forged Communist Unity. Member of TAS at the moment, I am. Yeah, now I've read that both those articles that Nick was referring to, and a note that I find particularly the comrades in CPGB that are really interesting, knowledgeable, and I learn a lot from them. But one thing I do think is that culture would be important in any organization, any fused organization. And I find CPGB, using terms like they seem to delight in disagreeing and throwing out insults in a way, useful idiots, the deluded left, um, you know, uh, and I know Jack said recently in one of his talks, he said, using a sharp word is a means to get people to think. But what do people think when people are bandying about terms like, for example, they're calling Nick, that piece by Jack Conrad, is it? And Nick gets called, is it Pol Pot, Stalin? I've written a list here. Any sect that the CPG don't like, strategically dumb, TAS, blind dialectic. There's just so many swipes and a condescension to the working class as a whole, as in surely the working class could grasp that there would be a transition and that we have a minimum maximum program. That's all the working class have got to. I just find that I don't want to be condescended to or insulted or and misrepresenting TAS. For example, one thing Jack said in his article was that nothing happens now except propaganda. Oh no, that was the other article. That was a report on Mike McNair's talk to the CPGB aggregate. It was by Thomas, wasn't it? That nothing happens now except propaganda for socialism, and talking about TAS like, oh, well, TAS comrades are othering TAS, as in the word communism is new to them. Just this kind of talk. I mean, comrades in TAS, a lot of comrades in TAS have been using the word communism for years and have looked at it in depth and read. Other comrades maybe have come to it more recently, myself, but I've been learning a lot over the past few years. And if you want to form a mass communist party, you're going to convert people to communism, aren't you? You're not expecting people to come fully formed who have been a communist since they were 16, etc., etc. It's a collective experience of the working class. I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Minnie. Peter.
Hi, folks. Yeah, just a quick point. I think what needs to happen is, for any fusion to kind of come about, there needs to be like a general agreement about where capitalism is at the moment, what the nature of capitalism is, in this period of time, because it's in there that we can make sense of what a minimum or maximum program is, if it is required or not, and what kind of items would go into the minimum program if we were to have that. And it's also important for come to some understanding of socialism and communism, the kind of this argument about transition. It's no use just saying I don't agree with transition. there has to be an argument as to why capitalism is not in transition. So that comes back to the general discussion which we need to have about where capitalism is right now, what constitutes capitalism, how it's developed. And we talk about the socialization, but it's no use doing that outside of looking at the, what is specifically capitalist about that socialization, and what is specifically an opportunity for workers within that socialization. And that means going back to looking at what, capitalism is as a kind of, why do we call it capitalism? Where are the contradictions that we associate with the class struggle and class antagonism? What are they? And how do they kind of colour or characterise or give form to the socialisation of production and development of capitalism that you spoke of right at the start, Nick? And I think politics and political unity can flow from there. And the other side of that is that we can, on the one hand, we could say that the differences in terms of CPGB's understanding of transition and socialism as part of that transition and working class power and the transit, and then the development of communism. We can either see that as a kind of deal breaker, or we can see it as a point of debate whereby we develop an argument as to why capitalism cannot work that way. It has to kind of be abolished. And we have this kind of process of working class power, abolition of the capitalist rule, and a transition to communism, which is kind of not as slow and laboured as the CPG would be suggesting it is. So, but it comes back again to analysing capitalism to resolve those issues, and I guess that's something that needs to be done for any fusion. Otherwise, it'd break down.
Thanks very much, Peter. I'm going to call in some more comrades now. I know that everybody will have views on this and will have been observing the process and thinking, well, either this is good. Perhaps some comrades wanted to go quicker and think that the differences that are being aired are actually not that significant. Others perhaps have a more pessimistic view. So we're obviously keen to hear from all comrades about what you think about it and how we can make progress towards communist unity, which I think we're probably all agreed is good in principle. So I'm going to see who else wants to come in to speak now. And I'm not going to say anything else until somebody does. Brilliant. Come in, either Minnie or Graham, whichever one of you, or both.
Yeah, just to finish off, I just coming in, there's no comrades are coming in, didn't quite finish off what I was saying. I might have taken up quite a lot of time. So whereas Jack says he uses Jack Conrad, a sharp word as a means to get people to think, like maybe call him a useful idiot or whatever. In Nick's recent article, one of the 4 that he says he's got another 3 to write, in contrast to that, Nick writes, while debate, including sharp debates between communist groups, are inevitable, we need to make it clear from our behaviour that we want to be in the same party with those with whom we are engaging, and obviously treat people in that way. I'm not being moralistic. I'm just saying, does it help our cause to call people idiots, etc., etc.? I don't think it does. And then on a point of coming to the table for fusion, in the spirit of genuine, principled communist. Seems to me from the article that Jack Conrad's article that Nick was getting around to, and that was issue 1533 of Weekly Worker. CPGB comes to the Forging Communist Unity negotiations wanting its draft program to be the basis for the program in any fused organization. So they envisage this as a mass CPGB, do they? I'm not bothered about what name we call ourselves, but I just think, and then obviously that would be presented to a founding Congress, people would vote on it and amend it, but surely that can't be the basis for fusion, that different, the discussions are ongoing and that comrades have different opinions on what a draft program should be, not necessarily 13,000 words with the history of the CPG organization in it, but something precise, something sharp that can cut through to the working class. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
No, thank you, Minnie. Stephen.
Thanks very much. So I think a point that was raised by Minnie, but I kind of just like to sort of follow up on, is in relation to the issue of factions. And I think it is a critical kind of issue, I think, coming into a process like this, where there are multiple groups who are fusing together at once. And also, if this organization is successfully fused, and there are opportunities for unity with other groups, or large sections of other groups, for instance, there is going to be this same problem is going to raise its head of learning to have organizations with open factions in which there are factional debates that exist in a way that's actually designed to clarify and to develop an organization rather than tear it apart. And I think that kind of comes from a few different things. I think the first is recognizing that that factionalism is fundamentally to some extent or other is a natural part of a healthy democratic organization. It comes back to the idea that kind of Trotsky expressed in relation to the ban on factions eventually anyway. The idea that the ban on factions doesn't end factionalism, it just leaves you with one faction, which is the leadership faction. I forget exactly where that is from, but but also with the idea that and I think this is something that's come up a lot in the FCU kind of talks already, is the notion that there is, like, for one, there needs to be a sense of proportion about what the stakes of these discussions are, which I feel like can sometimes get lost. I think when you're getting to the point where people are talking about there's the consequence of someone's view leading to the events that you saw in like in Cambodia or something like that. I think that is at the stage at which you are beginning to lose perspective of kind of exactly what the difference is, and also being charitable to the viewpoints of others within these groups, and recognizing that at the end of the day there is a shared goal. I think, as Nick pointed out through his lead off, that essentially that at the end of the day we are all here because we believe firmly in the need for a revolutionary transformation of society, and that is not at the end of the day, irrespective of these differences, well, not irrespective of these differences, in the end, these are differences over the approach to achieve that goal. Not, there are certainly more fundamental differences that we have with 99.99% of people, probably even on the broad left, let alone society as a whole. I think that's all from me.
Thanks very much, Stephen. So I'm going to call in Chris and then Kirsty.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Me?
Yeah.
You hear me? I can't see myself. Does that matter?
No problem. We can see and hear you.
Oh, I see. Okay. I would like to ask Peter to say a little bit more about what he means about the nature of capitalism. Because what I'm hearing is that there is a minority capitalist class which owns the means of production, and a majority working class which is exploited to expropriate profit, and also talk about bosses and taking power. It all sounds as if capitalism itself is about people, a group of people, or a number of groups of people. Whereas, in fact, the way capitalism works nowadays, it's much more of a system which the working class has collaborated in, to some extent, designed it. We allow the working class to be exploited in ways that I think are deplorable, and for the planet to be exploited in ways that are deplorable. But it isn't by a minority class of people. It's much more by a system which has ways of working through the economic systems, financial systems, transportation systems, all the various areas of exploitation, mining, manufacturing, waste disposal, all sorts of things which are set up. I've been a systems analyst in my working life, and they are designed in order to function. And the working class, by and large, acquiesces in that automatic system working, yes, in the interests of a few capitalists. You can say that there are billionaires who disproportionately benefit from it, but the majority of the capitalist system is machinery, is systems of communication, systems of transportation. So to take power, you've got to do a lot more than actually be a political party saying we have taken power on behalf of the working class. You've actually got to redesign the damn thing. Peter was mentioning something of this, saying that we need to look at what kind of a thing capitalism is. And disproportionately, it's a thing rather than a tiny group of people, as if they were slave owners or mill owners driving around in their carriages and so on. So I just like more clarity on that. What is it? What do we understand about the capitalist system as a whole? And what is it that we want to take over and abolish? And what are we going to abolish it in favor of? Presumably a better designed system which is less exploitative. But this isn't talked about. So Peter said the nearest thing that I could hear so far on that. So I'd like him to say more, please.
Thanks very much. So I'm going to call in Kirsty now, and then I'm sure we'll have a few minutes if Peter does want to develop any points. But of course, I'm really keen as well to call in any comrades who haven't spoken yet, and then we will have Nick, of course, to wrap up and respond to some things at the end. So Kirsty, do you want to come in?
Hi everybody. I was just listening to what Nick was saying about the name calling and the articles and things like that. I mean, if you remember way back in 2017, who was getting all the slander then? It was Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn was getting all the name calling. And this seems to be a problem, I think, with groups on the left. They never seem to have unity as such. And I think we need to get more of unity on the left, and that's basically all I wanted to say. Thanks, then.
Thanks very much, Kirsty. So I don't have anybody with their hand raised at the moment. If there are any comrades who want to come in and whether make a contribution or ask a question for Nick or I about how the process has been going or some particular aspect of it, by all means, we'd really like to hear your contributions and your thoughts. But otherwise, if there's nobody wanting to come in imminently, I don't know, Peter, whether you'd like to expand on some of the things that that Chris referred to.
Yeah, just maybe briefly. I'd really have to give a talk on it by itself, But I suppose what I'm referring to is when Marx spoke. There was a when he in his preface in Capital Volume 1, he mentioned the Russian Messenger, which is a journal, and it was holding a review of Capital in it, and so he noted with quite positively the way the guy who wrote the review had grasped that. What was really important to Marx, that a system like capitalism arises, it reaches an ascendancy, it develops, and then it begins to decay and transform into another system. Basically, that's what he was saying. And this is a kind of process that is structural, is systemic, if you like. And what it's based on is another thing Marx said in the Grundrisse, that the secret of any social formation is the social form in which the surplus is extracted from the direct producers. And when we look at capitalism, the social form is surplus value. So the system's health, according to Marx, can be registered or measured against how much surplus value is being produced, and whether the surplus value that transpires as profits for the capitalist who originally invested in their corporations goes back into production and expands capital. And what we find today as capitalism has developed is that most of it goes into the financial markets. So what we have is a system which is developed in such a way as to dissuade the return of surplus value into direct production to exploit workers for fresh seams of surplus value and accumulate capital. And we have a system which kind of offers another avenue, which is the development of the financial system we see today, where more money is in circulation than actual money capital. Money, in other words, used to be used in production to accumulate capital. Now, as that happens, then it's under a situation where Marx speaks about the commodity form, and he argues that this commodity form is the development of this contradiction. And the heart of the contradiction is that, on the one hand, capitalists are interested in extracting value, and on the other hand, the commodity itself is a use value which expresses social needs in society, or useful things. As we know, the useful and socially useful things and the social needs don't get produced unless they're producing value for capital. But over time, as the system begins to malfunction, if you like, and so it doesn't develop the force of production, it actually becomes parasitic in the financial markets, then that's because there's a kind of inhibition, if you like, for producing surplus value, and that's to do with the profit rate. So the profit rate is important, and that's why I'd have to go into a proper analysis of it. But the register is the profit rate, and so the system itself begins to kind of develop social needs and use values which it begins to police, other than those that were produced by value. And so as capitalism develops, we get a large-scale production of goods and services out with the market, which are developed by the state and policed by the state. And they're not democratic in any way. People don't have a decision in making them, and so on. So it's not democratic. And along with that, we have which is mirrored by that, and mirrored by all what I've just said, is the emergence of giant transnational corporations which make a mockery of our ideas that we live in market capitalism and in a free market. Because these giant organizations control most of the so-called small to medium businesses. And because they service the giant corporations, and most of the products that are made by the small to medium businesses go direct into the production chain of the larger corporations, and so they're directly social rather than being on the market. So there's a socialization going on of capital and a socialization of labor, and a kind of disruption in the production of value. But that society still needs to produce social needs and use values come what may, otherwise they would suffer unrest and all the rest of it. I suppose if we want to look at it in a way, you could say that, what's the broad picture of the world right now? We look at China, and they're looking at their future in terms of parasitic finance capital in the US, and USA looking at China and saying, this is our rosy past, which we can never attain. And that's the state of the system at the moment. And all other nations and regions are stuck in the middle of that.
Thanks very much, Peter. There's so much to get into there, as you say. Perhaps it will take a talk of its own, and perhaps we can talk more about that, because, of course, there are some real questions there about what is the remaining profitability of the capitalist system, and where's it going here in the near future and in the years to come. So I'm going to just share myself in briefly just to say this on this topic of the talks. I think there's a couple of things which it's important to sort of mention, just to give comrades just a bit of extra perspective, which is that we will be meeting in person again with the other participants in the FCU talks, and that will be this coming Saturday. And I think, I certainly think and hope that will once again be beneficial, because we've only had one in-person meeting so far, and I think every time we do meet in person, we sort of take a leap forward, which perhaps isn't achieved by relatively short meetings on Zoom. And so I'm optimistic and hopeful about what we can achieve and the progress that we can make. The other thing, I suppose, to mention on the subject of the programme is that while I echo Minnie's comments about the best way to approach the debate around the programme and the fusion process, if you like, in that what I've proposed right from the start is the maximum amount of collaboration. So seeing if we can draft a programme collaboratively together and see if there's something that we can produce collectively in that way, I think that would be best. We have, I think, arrived at a point where Nick and I, on behalf of TAS, will have to put forward our own draft to try and put into practice and make concrete some of the things that we've been talking about, so that comrades have a real sort of example of what we're proposing in front of them, and then they can engage with it. It may be that they still disagree, it may be that they read it and find that they agree with what we've been saying more than they thought, but we won't know until we do it. As Nick said, both of us obviously have the demands of work and the pressures of working under this system, which means we don't have as much time as we would like to devote to such important tasks as this. But we will, of course, be making progress on that in the near future. And again, hopefully that will take things forward. I'm going to see if anybody else wants to come in and make some final contributions. Any comrades who haven't spoken yet, you'd be very welcome to, even if it's only a question for Nick to clarify something in his closing remarks. All comrades are welcome. We appreciate all points of view and thoughts. So I'm not seeing anybody with their hands raised, in which case, Nick, would you like to respond and sum up and address anything that's been missed?
Sure, thank you. Well, thanks for the comrades who've contributed and asked questions. And I'm going to deal with Chris's points in a moment. It's difficult in some ways to sort of get a balance in terms of how to approach it, because we put a great store in these discussions, and there's a lot riding on the success of them, and so therefore our primary aim is to make them succeed. And we'll put as much time as effort into them as we can. And we need comrades in TAS, members, and the people that come to these meetings to let us know if you think we're getting it wrong, if you think we're dealing too much with the differences, if we're not spending enough time or we're not answering things. Because this isn't just about me and Ed. This is about trying to achieve a small group fusing with another small group. And so we want as much participation in these discussions as possible. I think Chris's point is a very good one. And inevitably in these discussions, sometimes maybe we use shorthand, or we take things for granted. Clearly, capitalism is a system. We call it the capitalist system. And it's a very, centuries old, very well developed historical system. And as Chris says, it's got all sorts of connections and structures and mechanisms in place which almost develop a life of their own. But I think it is important to realize and to understand that these are not abstract machines or robots that simply act on their own without anybody behind them. We live in a class society, and we have a class that sets that machine in process, that manages it, that runs it, it extracts surplus value from it in the form of rent, interest, and profit. And the people at the top, who Chris is right in this sense, and Marx makes the point that you, as capitalism has developed, you've gone from the sort of individual owner to basically what in Marx's times he called the joint stock companies, who didn't really have any role in managing. They employed managers and so on, but they just clipped the coupons. And that to a degree, although to a much rarefied degree, is what we have now. But we still have a capitalist class, and they can be identified. And we can work out who owns and who controls and who does what. And any serious communist party would have to do what Chris has raised, and that is prepare for what they will do when they come to power. And that's part of what the program is about. Whether it's possible to go into every nook and cranny in terms of what we would do, that's a good discussion. But we need to bear in mind that most of what happens on behalf of the capitalist class in terms of producing its surplus are acts that are carried out by members of the working class. Now, I personally do not blame or suggest for one moment that they become part of the capitalist class. They are being exploited in the interest and in the service of the people that are clipping the coupon at the top. But who is it that makes our railway system work? When a signal light goes red, who stops the train crashes? And you can ask that question about any single facet aspect of society. It's workers. So when the working class comes to power, lots of things will have to be changed. The factory system, the way that offices are run and so on, they'll all have to be changed. Who will they be changed by? By the people who work, by the workers, and the workers are the best people, the best placed people to make the changes. But fundamentally, they have to wrest power, first of all, and then economic power from that capitalist class. And in doing so, in making everybody work, and I put to one side the question of people with disabilities or young people or old people and so on, I'm including everybody in the working class in that, but everybody becomes a worker. There are no bosses. There is no extraction of surplus value anymore. Wage labor disappears. You have workers directly involved in the direction of production for what is needed. So you do get the economy focusing on proper use values, things that we need, and nothing more. But basically, classes disappear. So we're accused, I'm just going to move on to a different subject now, really, but it's linked. If you read Jack's article, and Mike's for that matter, we're accused of not really wanting a program. Now, this is just not true. And I went back over some of my own articles, and I outline in some detail that we do need a program. So in Jack's article, in Jack's inimitable way, he says, nonetheless, Comrade Wrack does provide us with this telling statement. And I said, he quotes me, and he said, I see the program as being a program for government, a government of the working class. And that's how I do see it. And I've just been rereading. If you can get hold of, you can find it online. I'll try and post up the link. If you can read Marx's comments, marginal notes on Bakunin, who was an anarchist and a hostile opponent of Marx, wrote a book called Statism and Anarchism, in which he criticized Marx and Marxism. And in 1873, that was written in 1873, and in 1874-75, Marx read this book, and in Marx's way, he copied out long sections of it and answered Bakunin. So he's got a conversation, Bakunin, and he's got a quote from Bakunin, and then he answers him. And I'll post up the link if I have time. But Bakunin says, so what you're saying, this government, it's going to be all the people, 30 million people in Germany. And Marx says, yes, the government of the people is everybody. And that's the form of society that he envisaged. And that's the form of society that I, as a communist, want to see, where everybody has the ability to participate in the running and the decision making and the direction and the planning of production to meet the needs of society, rather than everybody being in thrall and in hock and in the service rather of this tiny capitalist class. And therefore it comes back to this question: what is the task of the working class in coming to power? It's to abolish itself. It's to abolish classes, and it does that by abolishing wage labor and by abolishing the capitalist exploitative profit system. All of that is 3 or 4 different ways of saying the same thing. And so the program for me has to elaborate that and educate people that are listening and engaging with us as to what the task is. What do we need to, if we get power, first of all, how do we get to power? But if we get power, what do? We don't just sit on our hands and allow the exploitative system to continue. And so we've been engaging, as comrades who've been following will know, on the question of the role of petty production and so on. And I think Chris and Peter raised really important points that we do need to go into the detail. So, for example, if you read Jack's article, he makes a point and he says something like 6.1 small and medium enterprises in the UK. If you analyze those statistics, actually, the statistics don't suggest any such thing whatsoever. Every single self-employed person is involved or included in that statistic. That's Deliveroo drivers, self-employed cleaners, etc., etc. So we have to win people to the side of the working class. So we have to elaborate in our program ways to explain, for example, that people that work in shops or pubs or have these rather strangely selected family boat hire companies, how instead of under capitalism, these people having to work 18 or 20 hours a day to make a living, through cooperative work and being involved in the association of producers, they would get more, have more leisure time and a more enjoyable life through communism than they currently do. I find one point that I'd like to make is I find the approach of towards the implementation of the program, I'm going to say static and somewhat undialectical. By that, I don't like using that word, but I mean it's an inability to see change. If we anticipate or envisage that the only way that we can get rid of capitalism is through the mass of the working class acting collectively and consciously to change things, then we have to have a little bit of imagination and envisage a society in which the ideas of communism have become, in a sense, second nature to the majority of workers, or certainly a substantial section of the working class. And the Communist Party and its program has impregnated every section of society. And we would have won individuals from the ruling class, particularly their children, perhaps. We would have won sections of the petty producers who've looked at what we have to say and realized that actually cooperative work, associated production, is a far better way for them and their families and for future generations than struggling under capitalism. And even those small and medium producers or business people who aspire to become big business people for the reasons that Peter was outlining are never, ever going to make it. They can't compete. They don't have the capital to do that. And they get driven further and further towards the proletariat and into the ranks, therefore, of the working class. And as the Communist Party grows and as the conditions of capitalism worsen and deteriorate, we're talking about the Communist Party vying for power in a situation where the ideas of the Communist Party's program is much greater, more entrenched in society. And the obstacles that the CPGB see now in terms of petty producers being on the side of the ruling class, I think will have been answered in advance. I can be criticized for speculating. I don't know, but I do not anticipate or envisage the sort of problems that the CPGB do. But it needs analysis. It needs detail. We need to understand, how many workers are involved in all of these different areas of production. What do they do? How many people work in independent pubs, for example. When I walked home this evening, I passed a pub and I looked, and it was owned by chef and brewer. Most pubs, as I understand it, are owned by big commercial corporations. You do get some tenanted pubs where the landlords are at the beck and call of the landlord. You might get some owner-occupier pubs who probably work far longer than most workers, and who would be far better off if their pub was a community pub operating in conjunction with other aspects of society. But these arguments for communism are not commonly understood. They're not common ground in the working class. That communism would make a massive difference for the majority of people in society. The last point I want to make is I'm accused in one of the articles, I think it's Jack's, of not wanting to have a program with policies, but really wanting just an essay or a vague series of points. In my two articles, I say exactly the opposite. I do think that we need a program as a guide to action, but that's the nub of it. What is the action? The program for the working class in power that I've suggested would also be a guide to action in the here and now. And I say this expressly in one, if not both, of the articles. So the program would be, this is what we would do if we got into power. This is what we would need the working class to do if we got into power. But it also is outlining the things that we should be fighting for now. And in the course of those struggles, lessons are learned, revisions are made, changes are made, but the working class becomes more and more attuned with what is necessary. And the program becomes a living thing. It reflects the aspirations of the working class, honed to a single objective, and that is abolishing this present system. It does not help in the discussions. I think the point that Stephen made was a very good one. To take a point of difference and to turn it into such an exaggeration as to become ludicrous. So in the course of the two articles, I think Ed and I have been accused of being Proudhonists. Those of you who know your Marx and your histories of socialism will know that Proudhon was a rival philosopher to Marx. Marx criticized him. He wrote a book in 1847. Proudhon wrote a book called The Philosophy of Poverty, and Marx retorted with the philosophy of poverty, or the poverty of philosophy, rather. I got that the wrong way around. But from 1847 onwards was a rival. I'm not a Proudhonist. Ed's not a Proudhonist, but we've been accused of it. Bakunin, who wrecked the first International Working Men's Association, another rival of Marx, an anarchist, a putschist, a dangerous idiot. We've been accused of Bakuninism. We've been accused of 5-year plan Stalinism. And as Stephen pointed out, we've been accused of being akin to Pol Pot, who supervised or presided over the murder of 7.8 million people in Cambodia. These are ludicrous points, absolutely ludicrous points. Nobody can take them seriously, and they don't help the discussion. And the sooner it stops, the better. And Minnie made lots of other points illustrating the silliness of it. Perhaps, one silliness that I'll just raise is Mike and Jack both raised the point that Taz has only just started to call themselves communists. As if those of us that have been communists since our teenage years don't understand what communism is, or those who are in revolutionary organizations that call themselves socialists aren't vying or struggling for the same communist ends. So just one example. 2 years ago, the organization that was called Socialist Appeal changed its name to the Revolutionary Communist Party. The comrades in the CPGB are surely not suggesting that there's been a change in their politics. their politics has remained the same. They've changed their name, and they've done it with some elan, and we can look on with great pleasure at some of the things that they've achieved. But their politics, as far as I can see, haven't changed with the change of the name from Socialist Appeal to Revolutionary Communist Party. They still stand for the same thing. And that's because, like most Marxists in the modern period, they use the term socialist instead of communist. They mean the same thing. And that's the way that I use the term. I read the Communist Manifesto, I think, when I was about 12. Even though for most of my political life I've called myself a Marxist and a socialist, a revolutionary socialist, I've understood that to be communist. So it doesn't make any sense to suggest that those people that call themselves communists now somehow are unfamiliar with the term. It doesn't do the comrades any good or credit. It just makes them look a bit silly. Having said that, I'm looking forward to the meeting on Saturday. I wish that we had had the time to prepare more fully and to write the stuff that we've promised ourselves that we will write. But we'll go to the discussions. They will be friendly because they are when we meet in person. Hopefully they will be productive. We'll clear up more of the misunderstandings, I hope, and we'll clarify and drill down on whether the differences that both Mike and Jack, well, certainly Mike, because he said it in his article, he's actually said that these are fundamental differences, whether the differences that he's seen and that I've illuminated in this discussion are fundamental, or whether they can be resolved through further debate, which I hope, then we'll get a better grip on that. Thanks for the time, and I'll finish there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nick, and thanks from all of us for the introduction, and thanks to all comrades who contributed and attended tonight. Our next meeting will be in 2 weeks' time, but we don't have a programme set out for the coming weeks and months just yet, but one will be finalised very soon. So, comrades, please watch out for emails about that, and also, of course, if you have a suggestion or an idea for a meeting that you think this would be really helpful to have this topic discussed or made clearer, by all means get in touch with us via our website at talkingboutsocialism.org or drop us an email. So thanks very much, everyone. It's 9 o'clock, so I'll close the meeting now. Nice to see you all, and see you in 2 weeks' time.